Hey Chris, it's a pleasure to have you here today to chat with me. Excited to be here. I first came across across you and your project. I think when you opened the GitHub discussion in Zag.js, I think you kind of like gave us a shout out, and sort of talked about the fact that you're considering using Zag.js in your project. So it was pretty awesome to see, and I'm really excited to sort of learn about you and your project.
Yeah, it's a very interesting story of how we kind of came across you guys because the original versions of Skeleton were from a few years ago, and we started in this very it was very humble beginnings for the project. Really, is a good way to put it. In that it originally was just an internal component library for a small company that I worked for called Brain and Bones, and so we were
Okay.
building like a SaaS-based product. We needed a component library, and we were moving from Angular at the time to Svelte, and we were looking
Okay.
kind of at the Svelte world. And a few years ago, it was a very different scene. Like Svelte was still relatively new. There wasn't really a lot of like ecosystem as far as UI libraries and things like that. And
Yeah.
so what was there, it just didn't really like appeal to us. And so we kind of took it on our shoulders of like, okay, we'll just build our own. That's the easy solution, right? Totally not easy. But we were like, let's try it. Let's see what we can do. And so started, very, very small. We had a handful of components. We had this kind of loose idea of like a design system or theming system. And we're like, okay, it's working pretty well. And it was a small company, startup at the time, as startups do. That it went under. The company, ended, and the project was just almost just completely like nixed. Like it would just be like archived and not used. And so a couple of months went by, and I reached out to the owner of the company and my partner and said, "Hey, let's. I think there's something to this. What would you think about us open sourcing this and putting it out there to the community? And like maybe three people will use it, but let's see if we can help three people. Just see if we can get anything out there, getting traction." And so we did. We put it out a few years ago, and the reaction was actually really positive. It turns out there was a lot of folks kind of in the same situation as us, looking for this library of components, this kind of solution for theming and design and things like that. And they wanted something like this. They wanted it built, with Svelte, with this kind of emerging community and ecosystem that was coming around at the time. And so we had, a couple of years of very successfully like building and maintaining this, more components, building out the design system, kind of really coming to understand what Skeleton was and how it would serve, the greater community. And for me, learning open source, because this was my first like really, real contribution to the open source world. And so I was learning many things at once, as a but yeah, it was super exciting. I've had a wonderful journey with that, and we've had a pretty good amount of success with the library. Like most folks in the Svelte community probably have heard of, if not used, Skeleton at some point, which is a very exciting thing to say. And so we kind of during this journey, we always kind of knew we wanted to grow. We wanted to go
Hmm.
to more frameworks. We wanted to support, it just broaden the audience that could adopt and use Skeleton. And so we knew we had to do something. And so this is around the
Yeah.
time we'd already shipped Skeleton V2. We'd had, we had a bit of maturity to the library, but we started thinking, okay, we've acquired a lot of knowledge over the years. How do we grow this? How do we go to support React and Solid and Vue and all of these other options out there? Like, how do we do that? And so we kind of, myself and a couple members of the team, folks like Hugo, we came together and we said, okay, let's think about this. Like, if we were going to build the library today and we were going to solve all these problems, how would we do it? And so we started kind of thinking, okay, well, we want to adopt, the newest version of the technology. Svelte 5 is about to drop. Tailwind 4 is coming. We want to support React. We want to, grow all these different directions. How do we do this? And so we started looking initially at like our components, and so we started, literally just taking our components that we had now and just porting them from Svelte to React. And if you've ever been down that process, which I'm sure you have,
Yeah.
you start going multi-framework, it is a challenge, and it's a challenge in
Sure.
many different regards of accessibility, trying to keep the, feature parity, trying to keep the APIs similar or the same. Like, it's just a huge challenge. Like, how do you solve these like really big problems? And that was not necessarily something we wanted to be dealing with. We had this kind of focus, leaning more kind of design, side of things, and we just wanted the components to just work really well with our design system, right? And
Yeah.
so we started kind of looking into the ecosystem again. How are other folks solving this problem? And so initially we kind of looked at stuff like ShadCN, and they had this idea where they're building on top of these primitives, these built by like Radix,
Radix,
Radix.
yeah.
And then Svelte World, we had things like Melt and Bits UI, which are again those kind of primitives that you build your own component library on top of. And so we're like, okay, these are very cool ideas. Like, what if we take Skeleton and we build, on top of Radix for React, and we build on top of Melt or Bits for Svelte, and that works really well. It gave us some like some speed. We could develop and kind of move very quickly if we did that. But again, we had this problem of cross framework. The APIs didn't quite match. Features didn't quite match. It just didn't really quite hit that point we wanted for it. So at the time, I read a really good article by a guy named Brad Frost. If you've not heard of Brad, please check him out. He's amazing.
Yeah, yes. Mhm.
Really big into design systems and design tokens and all these like really cool concepts. And he put out an article called Global Design System. And I won't go into all the details of it, but essentially it's putting forth this kind of idealistic, utopia of web UI that's just like everything. We're not having to reinvent this ourselves, every time we
Right.
do a new project or switch between frameworks or whatever. We just have interface that works, right? And so
Mm.
that was kind of like where I was really thinking, I was like, how do we get to that? How do we solve that problem now? Because
Yeah.
the web moves kind of at a glacial pace as far as progress. And so,
Yeah.
like, how do we do that? And so at the time, Thomas Lopez from Melt UI, who's a good friend, skeleton in the project, and myself as well, Hugh and I were talking to him, and he said, "Hey, have you heard of this cool new project called Zag? I think it might actually kind of solve some of the problems you're looking for, especially when you're starting to talk cross framework and things like that." And so
Mm.
Hugo and I started kind of doing some initial like prototyping internally, like let's try it out, let's see what it works, how it works. Admittedly, I was a little hesitant at first because I was like, this like I want to lean into like the cool, bells and whistles for this framework and this framework, but then you
Yeah.
you end up is like completely different, end result, right? You have those problems that I was talking about of feature
Sure.
set, maybe and that kind of thing. And so we kept trying it, and then it kind of finally clicked for me, and I was like, "Oh, okay, I get it." You end up with this like unified set of APIs. You can work cross framework. You can get all of these features that even more features than we provided in our own components. At the time, like accessibility is just a solved problem. Across all this, it just ticked all of those boxes for us, and so we had spent a couple months trying to port, to React, from our internal, our custom kind of rolled
Yeah.
components. And in like 2 weeks, we had basically hit parity with what we had done in that past 2 months, just using
Oh,
Zap.
interesting.
And so it was just like speed. It's ticking all these boxes. It's just like that silver bullet we were looking for. And so I was so excited. It's like I immediately saw the possibility of like how quickly we could move with this. And so we just kind of went all in. We were like, okay, we're just going to port all of our components over using Zag as the foundation, and it's Zag, our design system on top, and that's what skeleton components become, right? And so we
Yes.
did that. And we still had some things that we wanted to do. We were still trying to figure some stuff out. We wanted to offer some kind of a headless option, but then we kind of realized like, hey, Zag is headless if folks really want to kind of just grab those primitives, or you guys have Arc UI, which is your own. I don't know how you describe it yourself, of your first party component library built on top of
Yeah.
Zag. However you want to put that, right? And
Correct.
so those options do exist for folks that still want that sort of thing. And so we said, okay, we'll just focus on what makes Skeleton unique. We can get the, build very quickly with Zag. We can do all of this. And so I think we ended up in the same amount of time we had only done like a third of the components doing it manually. We ported in the entire, set of components that we had for the previous version of Skeleton. within about, I don't know, 6 weeks, 2 months, something like that. And it wasn't
Interesting.
just Svelte, that was Svelte and React at the same time. We had the parity of all the
Yeah,
features matching, the APIs matching, all these things that, again, that we really wanted in just a very, very condensed amount of time. Now we were still juggling a lot of stuff. We wwere trying to build support for Svelte 5, and we're looking at updating the design system to meet the new release of Tailwind, because we use Tailwind heavily for the design side of things.
yeah.
And so we're juggling all of these things, and so we still had some ideas of, like, Hugo's bringing forth these like really good proposals of, like, what if we do this with the components? What if we do that? And I told him, I was like, we just have to ship. We have to get skeleton to get this. It's been 14 months. We typically take 6 months for like a major development cycle, so we have to ship something. And so we're communicating with the community, letting them know, like, this is what's coming. We're introducing Zag. That's probably when you heard me reaching out and things like that.
Yeah.
And we end up shipping the V3 version of the library earlier this year, and just huge success. I mean,
Awesome.
I can't put into words, like, we had so many like bug reports and accessibility issues reported, and feature requests, and all those things just kind of disappeared for us. Like, they just vanished, because Zag solved
Nice.
all of these things for us. Like, and the few times where it does come up, even now, it's just hey, we can resolve that upstream with Zag, and then it solves it for us. It solves it for RQI. It solves it for anybody using Zag. So it's a really cool way to kind of approach that. If there's not, kind of going back to that idea for Brad Frost, that kind of global design system. Like, it's not that, but it's very close to that, and that's
Yeah.
very exciting idea for us. And so we've just continued to kind of work on Skeleton and iterate, and the latest version of Skeleton V4 actually goes a little bit further, and it brings some of those ideas I was talking about that we had in mind for what we wanted to do with the components, which were just, to sum it up, is basically just lean into what Zag provides, just go further into what you guys are already providing, with a couple extra bells and whistles on our end. And so
Yeah.
we've kind of restructured the APIs and the components, themselves, to be more modular. So it's like a more composed tree structure, kind of like what you'll see if we show some code here in a little bit. We've
Nice.
overhauled styling and how we implement the styling on top of the primitives from Zag. We've introduced some cool, new stuff, like this kind of extensible markup idea, where you can take a component and you can actually access the Zag, APIs, and use that to kind of replace that portion of the template. So say you have like a trigger element and it's a button or something like that, or like a
Yeah.
collapsible, you have the portion there. Maybe you want to implement some animations for that. You need access sometimes to
On the
the DOM
line.
elements, right?
Mm.
You need a div or whatever. And so we've provided some ways to do that, which is really cool, because you've got all this, like, you know, turnkey component that you can just kind of ship and run with, or you can access and kind of go in, customize to this sort of nth degree. And then the last part of this, like this last big update, was bringing in kind of this idea of like a provider pattern. This idea of like
Mm.
being able to tap into that Zag API, so that if you want to have some kind of programmatic control over the component, so you want to clear an input, or you want to do whatever, like having the accessibility to be able to do that. And so we've now shipped that, and now I kind of feel like where we've landed with this is that we have sort of the definitive version of what skeleton components are, and it's just leaning into the best of what Zag provides, as far as functionality and logic and state and all of that, and what we're bringing to the table with the design side of things. And so I'm just thrilled with it. Like, when Segun reached out and said, "Hey, you want to talk about this?" I was so excited, because I'm like, "Oh, I've got so many exciting things to talk about here," because it's been such a boon for us, and I just love, like, pushing that envelope forward, and helping provide better technical solutions for the problems that people face every day. Because I've done this stuff for 20 something years, and it's like, I'm
Wow.
tired of running into those same problems over and over and over. And so being able to kind of
Sure.
come in here and just hopefully push some of that forward, of like, here's some great ways to solve some of those problems you have. Yeah, it's just amazing. It's an amazing feeling. So
Yeah, that's so awesome. I mean, definitely you probably spent like the last 15 minutes just like talking about how awesome Zag.js is.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, really good to hear. One thing I'm curious about, if you walk me back to like the origins of Skeleton, you
sure.
mentioned that you had like a partner, you had a business, or you worked at a
Yeah,
startup, and you typically wanted to like still keep Skeleton alive, and
yeah,
you propose like let's just make this thing open source, right? So
yeah.
from that point on up until now, I mean, how do you manage to sort of like juggle your time? Do you still work at this company, or like how is Skeleton UI? How has it grown now to the point where you really want to keep working on it?
Yeah, I mean that's always the challenge with open source, right? Like we all want to sit down and work on open source and build our own, cool new tool for this or that. But how do you
Yeah.
actually make it a reality, right? And so for us, what that looked like was again, I started, about 3 months of the project was built, internally for this company. It was going to be proprietary. It was all going to be just internal. It wasn't going to be open source or public in any way. And it wasn't until that, a couple months later, we open sourced it. And so I came to Trey, who's my business partner and was the owner of this company, and I said, Trey, what if we put it out there? Like, so he's like he had some questions. Like, okay, he's coming from a business perspective. How does this work? What is open source? How do people build on this? Is it something that can be monetized? Is it something that you can build a company around? And I kind
Mm,
of walked them through, like, here's the challenges. Like, it's hard to monetize, but it's kind of like a community good sort of thing, right? Like you're contributing back to this thing. Because I mean, so much of our technology in our space is built, it's open source. It's built on the shoulders of these people that are just, it's either a passion project or they've fallen into that lucky, area where they can have some kind of funding from a large company or whatever. For us, we didn't have any of that. We didn't have any funding. We didn't have anything like that. So initially, it just came out of our pockets. We needed
oh,
the
interesting.
hosting. We needed the time to build it. And so I was essentially just living on my savings. Like I wasn't working. I wasn't doing that. I was just working full time, and I wanted to deliver Skeleton. And so I
Mm,
put essentially a couple of years into it, where it was mostly just me contributing, financially and things like that. And then over time, we started introducing like community funding. So like people could sponsor the project on GitHub's, sponsors and Ko-Fi and things like that. And so we finally got to the point, somewhere within those first couple of years that we were able to transition that off, and that wasn't coming out of my pocket as far as like keeping the lights on, keeping the servers running, that kind of stuff. The community, and even to this day, the community takes care of that. And that's such a cool, like it was such a cool thing. Now, obviously, that's not a sustainable model if you have no money coming
yeah.
in as a person, building this thing. So I did eventually have to kind of start splitting my time, and I work, even now as part time as a freelancer for a couple different projects over the last couple of years, and part time on Skeleton. So my day looks like essentially like 3 hours in the morning I'm working on Skeleton, and the rest of the day I'm working my job that pays. you know. So my hope is still that we can find some ways to help kind of monetize and make this like a full time thing, because I think there's so much benefit that can come to Skeleton from me just being able to put more time into it, because I was able to
Totally.
move and do so much within a couple of years there that when I was working on it full time. And so we're looking at the same thing a lot of folks in the open source community are doing, like building services or quality of life things that live alongside the open source product, but you can still monetize, be that themes or kind of the blocks UI or like, chunks of UI and stuff like that. Like just
Makes
quality
sense.
of life stuff that we can do. So we're kind of looking to kind of move towards that direction. And then, hey, the we would love to kind of fall into a situation that Svelte did, where Svelte is run by Rich Harris and his team from the Svelte side of things, and then Vercel came in and started funding them. They just basically hired Rich and said, "Hey, we want you to continue building Svelte. We're not, minimal influence, I'm sure. Just continue doing it." And that's the dream for all of us in the open source world. Is like, hey, just you're going to pay me to do the thing I already love to do. Great, let's do that. So
Yeah.
whether or not that'll ever happen, we'll see. But that's my hope, is that we can find some combination of these things that will help kind of carry things along. But until then, I'm still very passionate about the project. I still work on it, every day, whether it's my office hours or my evenings or weekends, I'm still looking at skeleton stuff. I'm still talking, helping people in the community, supporting folks, whatever we can do. So it's the kind of thing where I love the project, I love the people that I work with on the project, and I love the community. And so it's very rewarding unto itself. And so if we can just kind of get to that extra step where I can support myself, that'd be great. But until then, it is what it is. So
Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. I think one thing that came to my mind while you spoke was, I'm curious, how long has it been since you started Skeleton, the first commit? And what would you say like has been like the hardest challenge you've had to face on this
yeah,
project?
so I think it's been 3, maybe 4 years. I forget exactly when we started. I think it was 2022.
Okay.
So do the math there. But yeah, we're coming up on 4 years, I think, and the challenges were initially, like I said, learning open source, learning how do I work with not just a small team or people that are close to me, how do I work with a community of folks. And
Mm,
so that was an initial challenge because we would get a lot of folks initially, coming in. They were very excited, but they didn't necessarily know. We didn't necessarily know what skeleton was, so everybody had a little bit of conflicting ideas and like, oh, let's be this and let's be that, and so me as the maintainer, I've had to really kind of make sure we kind of find our focus, make sure we're going in this like unified direction. And then really there's this whole part that you don't really think about when you get into open source, which is the community portion of it, right? A
mm,
lot of folks kind of fall into open source because hey, you just like building cool stuff, right? And so you just want to do that, right? You just want to sit there and kind of work on the code and that kind of thing. But if you want to be successful, you want folks to use it, you have to find that community. You have to find your people.
yeah.
And we've I think in that regard been highly successful in that we've had this huge swath of the Svelte community come in and just, with open arms, kind of adopt Skeleton and do so in a very like productive way. Now we do kind of get the occasional bad apple that comes in and it's like, oh my gosh, you're supporting React, you're the worst person ever, or whatever, listening to comments and things like that. And so you gotta have to have thick skin, with some of that
Yeah.
stuff. People are going to say the nicest things most of the time, and then sometimes you're going to get those comments that just kind of throw you off balance, and you just have to find a way to kind of put that aside and just be like, no, no, what we're doing is good. This is, I'm excited about this, and we're doing the right thing. So
Yeah, that's awesome.
it's been a journey. It's kind of evolved over time, and so now we've fallen into this place where we're very comfortable. Like we have the tech is there, the community is there. We have nothing but exciting ideas of like what we want to build for the future. It's really just that stuff we were just talking about with the open source and money and financials and how you support and things like that. Because again,
Makes sense.
I'd love to wake up every day and just work on skeleton, all day, if I could. But
Yeah.
until that's a reality, then there's a little bit of life balance that you have to kind of make between those.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's good to hear. I think the next thing I'm curious about, of course, is now just how skeleton works. I mean, I'd love to sort of like, I'd love you to show us some sort of a technical like rundown of like Zag.js and how it actually integrates within skeleton.
Sure,
Of
sure.
course, as the creator of Zag.js, I mean, my mind is ticking already. I'd love to sort of see and learn,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And I
what you
hope
guys
we,
have
we
going on.
get justice, like we've done, we worked, real hand in hand with you guys to try to do, do the best job we could for sure. So
Yeah, I'm excited. That's good.
do a screen share here so we can look at some code if that's helpful here. So,
Sure.
of course, we have our documentation. So if you go to skeleton.dev, that's the documentation. You can see the actual kind of user facing end of some of the stuff. But for the technical side, I wanted to just look at some code because we're most of us are probably developers here. Let's look at some code. And so what I've done
Yep.
is I put up our avatar component, and you can kind of see how we have this structured. And so some of this we've modeled a little bit on how you guys are doing it over on ArcUI side. Some of it is just kind of working into some conventions that we have, things like that. And so kind of the root of it all starts right here is we just have, index file where we just kind of bring in and pull together all of the parts. So we have the anatomy, which are the actual individual components for Svelte to React.
Hmm.
We might have things that, other things that we're exposing through that. So the modules and things like that that we're using for the provider, as I talked about the kind of provider pattern stuff earlier, any kind of shared context for sharing data state throughout the component tree, things like that.
Yeah.
That's all kind of tucked away in here. But to start with, I think the easiest thing is just to look at what we call our root component. So that's for the
Mm.
avatar, that's the outermost kind of portion of the component. You might have that and then the smaller component pieces inside of it. But this is the outer
Okay.
portion. And so what we do, at least on the Svelte side, is we have, a few things that are like internal tools that we use that are doing things like helping with types and making sure that we have the consistent interface and things like that. We have the type definition here that we're using. Sometimes we do things like we omit the ID that's provided and substitute with our own sort of solution.
Yeah.
We also have this kind of really cool new technique with the newest version of Skeleton where when you add any kind of attribute to the component, it's passed to the
Hmm.
element. And so to
Mm.
do
Okay.
that, if it's a div for the outer element or it's a button or something like that, essentially we want to do some basic type checking to make sure that you're providing only attributes that are relevant to that. So you don't want to
I
add
see.
a conflict to a div because that's not accessible, right? That's a bad thing to do.
Yeah.
You do want to add it to a button. So we're doing some things in here to kind of add that kind of auto suggestions and things like that as you're using the component.
Nice.
As we kind of go a little further in, you can see this is where we're bringing in some of the Zag features here. We have some of the utilities that you guys provide for splitting props and things like that. You can see where we're kind of stitching everything together. So whenever you pass in props, that's going to be all here. We've got the element, which I'll talk about in just a second, which is part of that kind of extensible markup stuff that I was talking about. Any
Okay.
children passed within, and so on like that. You can see we're setting the ID here. So what we're doing is essentially we're auto setting the ID for you. You can still set it manually, but we're trying to do best practices, set that for you ahead of time.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So how do you use this avatar component right now?
So the quickest way, let me see if I can switch real quick and I will
Okay.
share a different tab or window for you. So here's the component itself. So you can see, in here, here's, I'm going to go this one. This is going to be a little bit simpler. This is that root component we were just we're just looking at. And so you can see it's a very simple, syntax. You've got the outer portion, you've got these kind of composed structure or modular stuff for things like the feed, the fallback element, things like that.
Mm.
And
Okay.
what you're doing is you're building that little tree, right?
True.
You
Yeah.
might have an image, you might have fallback, you might have all these different little parts within. And so that could look something like this. There's the image here, there's the fallback, there's the root component. Any of those attributes I was talking about that are passed in, like class or alt for an image element. Again,
Yeah.
we're not creating the props for those, you're just passing those in. So it's just a straight up pass through to kind of get those two from what you're passing to the component itself. And so
Right.
one of the things we changed with the new version of Skeleton is that each component basically represents one element. And so what that did was, in previous versions we had this like monolithic kind of component where it had all these different parts and it was different elements within the component and how do you pass the classes for Tailwind to this portion or that portion. It was just
Oh,
very
I see.
challenging. So we took that step back and said, no, 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 each component represents one element. So it's just kind of a one-to-one relationship. So if you pass
Mm.
an alt tag, you know where it's going to land. You pass the class, you know it's going to land on this element for this
Yeah.
particular. And just really again trying to simplify some of those different portions of that. And so that's what really a lot of this represents. And the only thing that kind of gets that's a little bit interesting or a little bit different than what you might be used to on here is this element portion. And so I'm going to jump over real quick here and I'm going to show a quick example of what you can do with this, which is here. And so what the idea here is, we were talking earlier about, being able to implement your own animations and
Yeah.
access the elements within the component. And so what we've done is, at least for, if you're using Svelte, the API is a little different for React. But in Svelte world, you have this idea of a snippet, where it's kind of like a slot, and then you can access, you can have data passed up from the component externally to when you're implementing the component here. So in this accordion here, we have
Mm-hmm.
a accordion trigger. We're using the snippet. We're grabbing the element, and then specifically we're using the attributes. And here we're just spreading them to a custom button, just an HTML
I
button
see.
that is here. And all this is doing under the hood is taking the Zag APIs that are typically spread to the component, built into the component, bringing them up and letting the user
See.
do that themselves, which means that you have access to all of the information within here. So if there's a hidden state or there's, something like that, you still have access to all of those things, but you can directly manipulate the element here. You can add a wrapping span or a div or, things that would be a little bit more challenging that if you were trying to kind of like, you don't have access to the raw source for the component itself. And so it's a very like
I
kind of neat
see.
idea, and so it's I haven't seen other component libraries do this. This is a brilliant idea from Hugo. Let me give him the shout out on this one.
Shout out to Hugo.
It's a very like power centric feature of like, there's those of us that really want to get into the nitty gritty and kind of get in there and really like change stuff, at a very small degree. And so this is just one of those ways we do that. And so we have that. We have the ways to tap into the provider, to be able to access the Zag APIs, things like that. So you can kind of see
Yes.
the model for that. We're just kind of essentially grabbing that, where you're getting access to this, and then you just have access to this tooltip API, which is the Zag API, to run like a set open method, or whatever, look at the open state for the component, or whatever. And so again, we're just using the components here to be able to provide those different options to users. You want to access the markup, you want to access the API, you want to access,
Yeah.
you want to pass any kind of like arbitrary attributes to the element that lives inside of here, this div or what have you. We're
Yeah,
providing
that's
those different.
awesome.
So that's, again, that's kind of skeleton in a nutshell. That's the way things kind of work there. And it's
Nice.
again, just providing as much access as we can and getting out of the way to let Zag do it what it needs to do and what you want to do with the components themselves.
Yeah, that's great. And so far, since you have integrated Zag.js into Skeleton, like how would you say like the experience has been? I know you touched on that a little bit during the intros. How would you say like it's been as far as like I mean just the component quality, issue management, and just like how easy has it been for you? I'd say.
I mean, I can't say enough nice things. Like it's just solved so many problems for us. The best way I can really put it is that we're no longer concerned about components. We're concerned
Mm,
about what makes Skeleton unique. And that's really what I wanted out of, whatever solution we landed on. So not only do we have access to all the components we currently support, Zag has this huge, like, I think we only support maybe half, maybe less of the components that you guys offer. And so we have this huge library to grow into, and you guys are still adding more every day. Every day, like I come on there and it's like yesterday I was like, oh, you got this other new component. I just, I was wanting to see it added. And, when it comes to bugs and features, like so many features are just packed into this, like probably, I want to say, I don't have a number on hand, but I'd say like it feels like double of the features that we have per component. And it's just things that we wanted to grow to and just didn't have the time for.
yeah.
We're a small team. There's only really a couple of us that are contributing code day to day, so when you're that small, it's hard to just have the time that it takes to implement even small features here and there, and then keep that in parallel. Add all of those extra factors, and then things like I really want to like kind of put out there is the accessibility. Like that is such a huge part of what I care about because I have folks in my life that are disabled. They would be, whatever type of disability that is. I see folks that struggle with accessibility for using the internet, using other things in life, and so I always want to make sure that we're putting forward a very top-notch accessibility story, and that's one of the things that Zag does really well. In that you guys cover just about everything you can think of. It was way better coverage than what we had with our homegrown components. I can tell you that for sure. And if there is a gap, like again, there's that contribution that we can make, either us on the skeleton side contributing upstream to Zag to say, hey, there's a bug here, or there's an accessibility thing that we should address, and you guys have been nothing but responsive with us to be able to like help either implement that or allow us to submit a pull request and get those things in there. And again, there's this like snowballing effect that happens for that, because every contribution to Zag just helps not only skeleton and skeleton users, but it helps Arc users, and it helps folks that are using Zag directly. And it helps, just all, I think you guys are using, I don't know if you're using it for Chakra as well.
Yeah,
Like,
we do.
it
We do.
helps
Yeah.
everybody. And that's really, again, what we all kind of really want to get to. We want to get to that level where we're not just solving the same problems over and over and over. We're just beating our head, you know, over and over and over on these same kind of problems. We want to move past that so that we can ship, the products we're working on, or we want to focus on the things that actually kind of interest us and are, that kind of thing. So in all of those
Makes sense.
regards, Dex just like knocked it out of the park. Just it is that, again, that silver bullet that we were looking for. And again, it solves so many things, even about stuff that we haven't done yet. Like, we're still looking at what you guys do with Arc and things like that, as far as patterns for how you implement components and things like that, that we want to continue to kind of follow along with. And so, like, I think, it's been, I'm hoping, very collaborative in that, we've hopefully,
Yeah, of
provided
course.
help
Totally.
you guys out. You guys, of course, provide so much to help us out. And I just would love to kind of continue to see that going forward. And not just from us, but, more folks in the community. Because I look at, Shad CN and they're using Radix, and I look at, Bits and Melt and all of that in the Svelte world. And I'm like, man, I wish we could just all come together and just build this like super, super tool that just helps everybody. And,
Totally.
if there is the closest we think we've got right now, I think is Zag. And that's such a, just a cool proposal, like just a cool idea that that kind of thing exists.
Totally, totally. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, of course. Definitely appreciate the collaborative nature of
Yeah, yeah.
Skeleton and
Likewise,
Zag. I
likewise for
think,
sure.
yeah. I mean, I'd definitely love to sort of like, I mean, love you to speak on. Let's say we've got a team currently looking to like, I mean, they're trying to build their own internal design system. I think this happens almost every month at this rate.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to build a component library or design system. I mean, given your own extensive research and experience. I mean, what would you say? How would you make a case for them to consider like Zag.js or even RQI or something, or Skeleton as well? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, you kind of see this going, the industry kind of going in this direction where, in prior years we had everybody was building their own component library, and it was kind of like isolated, right? Like, they're building this one over here, they're building this one over here, they're building it over here, but there wasn't any kind of like, connection between them other than borrowing ideas, contributing to one another, that kind of thing. Like, there wasn't really like a technical kind of overlap there. And so that's why I would push folks is, again, I recommend folks go back and read that article, that Global Design System by Brad Frost. That's at least in my mind the pinnacle for what web interface can be.
Mm,
And so this idea of building, this tool that kind of works across all the frameworks and solves the same problems that we have to build over and over. And you don't have to build this feature again. Like, how many, I'll ask, this is a question you kind of folks can think about themselves, is how many times have you built an accordion? How many times have you built a modal system? How many times, over and over and over. And we all kind of get tired of it after a while. It just feels like wasted time that we could be spent doing
mm,
something much more productive. And so if that's the things that you're running into, consider, if not Zag, consider, one of these sort of primitive, component options that brings these things to the table so that you don't have to solve those problems. Because the problem you always inevitably run into is that you don't have the time to do everything that you want to do. You don't have the time
sure.
to answer the accessibility problems. You don't have time to build all the feature set you want, on and on and on. And so what that time could be spent on would be much more productive. I feel, at least, from our perspective, is contribute to what already exists. The Zag doesn't have a feature, contribute that feature to Zag. Then everybody has that feature. It's just a different way, kind of twist that idea and think about things. But I'm very excited about the possibilities that lie therein of what you could do with that. And it's just, again, it kind of comes into what we always kind of struggle with programmers in general, is like standardization. We all kind of want a standard in a lot of ways, but
Mm,
does the standard exist, or is there multiple competing standards? Or there's the XKCD comic about that. Go check that out. But
mm,
it's that kind of thing is like you don't want to keep building the same thing over and over. That's just not a productive cycle to be in. So any ways that
totally.
you can find to contribute that save you time, like working with these tools can save you time, in the long run. Like just look at what it did for us, with 2 months work done in 2 weeks instead. It was just crazy amount of difference.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I think one of the principles we technically work by in our chakra verse in general is like there's no wasted effort in our system. So we try to get rid of every bit of waste in there. So prior, I'd say maybe 3 years ago, we used to have like a lot of wasted energy
Mhm.
gone into like Chakra UI, and we had Chakra UI for React, Chakra UI for Vue, and
Yeah.
this issue happened again. We just like wasted a ton of time maintaining this one, fixing bugs in here that doesn't really align with the React version. And then we have another breaking change from time to time across these two frameworks in that sense. So we definitely did take a step back. At this point, it seemed like Chakra UI took a break in the timeline, but I think like ultimately, I'm so proud we did that because that break led to the birth of Zag.js, and that now has helped us to actually like work at super speed.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, this year alone, we've added like a ton of components to Chakra UI that I mean previously would take us a year or two to actually like
Yeah.
build
And
that.
it just
Yeah.
works across multiple frameworks, like it
Yeah.
just like I said, it's that snowball effect of like you're putting in the work and it's like here, and then it just as over time you're just seeing more and more, of the result of that. It's so cool. So
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. I think one last question I'd love to just throw at you would be like, what's
yeah.
your take on the future of design systems in general? Like, given the current age we live in, where like, I mean, every UI component is one AI prompt away. You don't need to use a library.
Yeah,
You just prompt
yeah,
it. Like,
yeah. I mean,
what's your
that's
take?
that's really at the forefront of all of us right now. Is anyone in the development space has, what effect is AI going to have on us? We're already seeing, a lot of that, good and bad of, how it's influencing stuff from how folks learn, to use the tools. Like we've just gone through a big cycle with Skeleton where we've updated our documentation to make it more LLM friendly so that folks
Mm,
can get better access to the information that they need, because we were running into problems where and I kid you not, this actually happened. We had a guy reach out to us and say, hey, I'm having this problem with the skeleton component and I'm checking my LLM and it's telling me this is the problem. And I had to have the conversation with him and say, no, that's not your problem. I know because I built the component. Trust me, bro. Trust me, bro. It's not your problem. And so, what we took away from that is, it wasn't necessarily that the LLM was a bad resource for him to reach out to. It's that the LLM was not informed well enough of what it needed to tell him
yeah,
to tell him the right answer.
makes
And
sense.
so we're kind of moving in that direction already of let's find ways to lean into that as best we can. Me personally, I still am a little bit like, I'm a little conservative when it comes to this stuff. I'm still a little bit of the old man yelling at the cloud meme, of like, this newfangled technology kind of stuff. But I see the benefits of what's coming, and I see the tide changing and things like that. And so AI is going to be a big portion of that. Whether or not it's like building the entire interface for you, I don't know. We've seen some cool stuff like VO from the Vercel, side of things that are doing some of that stuff. But I struggle with, like, there is a lot of nuance to building, architecting an entire application. And so I
Mm,
think that's the thing that especially like folks that are new, green, or new to the industry, they kind of miss is they they maybe haven't built a large scale product, or haven't
yeah, I see.
maintained a product over a number of years. And so it's only if you've done that that you really see where some of these things can kind of go wrong, of like, yeah, that's the right answer in this like very isolated scope, but are you taking in the big picture, right? And
Sure.
so that's going to be where the challenges come. And it's not just AI, it's just in general of like, how do we kind of continue to make sure that the tooling is good, make sure that the documentation is good, make sure that we're pushing folks towards sort of a pit of success, And so that's our responsibility as, the maintainers of these tools, is to try to find ways to help encourage this next generation to adopt the best practices, to understand why accessibility is important, to understand, that kind of thing. And then, of course, we have, all the changes that are happening in the browser and the web itself. We've got all of these exciting new APIs coming to the table. We have things that we've wanted, for decades, things like the popover API and the CSS anchoring stuff, so that we can get rid of, amazing tools like floating UI. I'm glad they exist today, but they shouldn't
Yeah,
need to exist for us to be able to successfully build those types of interfaces.
makes sense.
Because
Makes sense.
again, the challenge there is you don't always get the accessibility right. You don't get the feature set right. You don't get all of those things if you're rolling those over and over and over yourself. So it's interesting to kind of look forward of like what is coming and how are we going to kind of solve that. And so the way we're approaching it from the skeleton side is, again, we're leaning into the AI stuff as far as information, technology, teaching, that kind of stuff. We're looking at the new APIs that are coming from the browser, and we're saying, okay, how do we do that? Does that mean that eventually we stop shipping components for modals and toasts and things like that, and instead just lean into the native APIs for that and just build kind of simpler implementations around that? And then we're also looking at, we've got the component side and the functional side, but we also have the design system side of things, right? We have
Yeah,
the
true.
visual portions, your themes, your colors, your typography, your iconography, all of those portions to juggle. And so we're trying to solve that by leaning into some of these really cool kind of patterns that things like Tailwind provides. So Tailwind gives you this sort of framework or this sort of guardrails for how, the standard for how you implement utility classes and use those through an entire project. But it doesn't
Yeah,
necessarily solve how do you use those at like a large scale. How do you have a theme system? How do you build a theme system in Tailwind? You ask 10 different people, they're going to give you 10 different results. And so we're trying to kind of
yeah,
provide at least, here's one standard that you can maybe look at and then use that between your team or your projects to help kind of carry that through, while
yeah.
still
That's
providing
awesome.
options for like customization. You want to use your own icon library, go use this one, and we'll support it. The component support it, the design system support it, that kind of thing. So
Awesome,
that's the
awesome.
direction we're coming at it. Is again just looking at what's coming, kind of getting feel for it, and just trying to lean into what we feel is going to be like where everything's going to land.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's awesome. Yeah, cool. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. I mean,
Yeah.
it's definitely an exciting future, I'd say.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
As far as like, I think for the most part, one of the things I'm excited about isn't necessarily the fact that we've got AI and LLMs, but the fact that like, I mean, the rate at which browser features are improving and
Oh
the
yeah.
framework itself, HTML, CSS, like the rate at which the spec is
Yeah.
actually evolving is like pretty nice to see. And I imagine that even, I mean, trying to get like browser support across boards should be much easier now, given that we've got some sort of AI to help, because this is one huge pain point for design systems. I cannot use the Popover API because someone is using some sort of outdated browser and I need to provide a poly fee for that. And all of these little quirks. I think I'm definitely excited to see how this shapes the platform over time.
I mean, I come from an age where we were still dealing with things like IE, so I feel that pain of
Oh,
like,
yeah.
oh, step for IE, and then you gotta bend over backwards to make that work. And I definitely feel from where I was, early in my career to where we are now, is that this is really the best time possible to get into, web development and
Yeah, true.
things like that, because the tools are there, the information's there. It's just very easy to get started. You can run a one-line command and scaffold an entire project, whereas like that was like something that was much more of a challenge, even 5-10 years ago.
True.
And so it's really great that the tools are maturing, the information maturing, the community I think is coming together and really trying to doing their best to solve these really hard problems, because that's the thing you don't look at. Folks that are come from outside of the web world don't necessarily look at and understand is like how many different devices, browsers we have to support, all the different sizes of screen, everything like that. And it just has to work, and it has to work consistently, and it has to work in an accessible way. And so it kind of feels like you're juggling a million balls at once, kind of thing. But somehow we make do and we make it work. And
Totally.
I'm excited the direction everything's going because it's just going to continue to get better and better and better, I think.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, thanks, Chris. I mean, it's been an awesome conversation with you.
Yeah, yeah,
Thanks for
likewise.
telling us all the stories. I'm definitely inspired by what you guys are doing also at
Yeah,
Skeleton.
likewise, likewise. Like I said, I can't thank you enough for you and your team for what you've done for Zag and how it's helped us and in turn helped the community and helped a lot of folks in the both Svelte and React world. Like it's just a huge stuff. So thank you guys as well.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, thank you all. Thanks for watching. Hope you had fun listening to our chat. And yeah, if you've got questions, feel free to drop it in the comments, and we'll take it from there.